Hi, this is going to be a dysphoric video. So 9 years ago, when I was a wee lad, I decided that I wanted to be a scientist, and so I enrolled in a biology PhD program. Oops. A lot has changed in the last 9 years, but for better or for worse, I am still enrolled in that PhD program, and so I'm posting this video as part of finishing it all up. See, I'm going through all of the work that I've done in the last decade and trying to narrativize how it fits into some official story about why I deserve a PhD. It is an unpleasant process, not least because I have to go through hours of footage of me as a boy and then say something about it. So what you're about to watch was my coming out video. It makes me cringe. There are so many things about it that I wish were different, and in fact I have had to go back and sloppily edit a few things in order to republish this. See, when I first started thinking about transitioning, I tried to talk to as many trans people as I could. So this video features an interview with Natalie Wynn where I said some deeply embarrassing things that will haunt me until the day I die. I looked up to her so much. It also features interviews with trans people in the Commune network that I live in. And when I first published the first version of this film, one of the people that I interviewed, a woman who I'll now call Violet, asked me to take the film down. She was uncomfortable with the way that she was represented. This frustrated me. At the time, I didn't yet understand the ways that looking at images of yourself from early in your transition can be agonizing. Let me tell you, it is painful, but consent is consent, and I didn't want to represent Violet in a way that she didn't want to be seen. So in order to republish this film, I've gone through and blurred out all of the images of her and modified her voice so that she sounds like a chipmunk.
I wish I could do the same to myself and
still have the film make any sense. So as you watch this, please understand that it's a snapshot in time, and the things that I and other people say are probably not representative of what we think right now. Many of the people that I interviewed are significantly further along in their transitions than these images from 2018 suggest. Some of their names have changed, and ContraPoints actually took down a few of the clips that I referenced from her YouTube channel for similar dysphoric reasons, and I'm deeply sorry if my republishing of this film causes anyone in it distress. It's certainly causing me enough distress. But I feel like I need to republish this, because even though I don't agree with a lot of what I said 5 years ago, I still think that there's an important story here that shouldn't be buried or hidden behind this overwhelming feeling of gender dysphoria. Other than obscuring Violet's name and image and voice, I've made no other edits to this film. I think if I tried to modify it further, I might go mad, so please watch it as a time capsule of the way that I was 5 years ago. And this version of me here will come back at the end to wrap it all up. Okay, without further ado, welcome to the EVOS seminar series. Today, we're going to talk about gender with the help of ContraPoints.
My name is Natalie, which is probably what you should call me instead of Professor ContraPoints, which is awkward, and I'm also not a real professor.
We can start with the rather humdrum observation that gender evolves. It changes. There was a time in the distant past when gender didn't exist, and there's been many times in the more recent past when gender was something different than what it is today.
The 18th century idea of masculinity is very different from, say, the contemporary hipster idea of masculinity.
So this video is about how gender changes over time, and it's going to be in a slightly different format than the other videos on this channel because, well, I'm white and male mostly, and so my perspective isn't exactly the best perspective to start with for a video on the evolution of gender. So we're going to talk to some other people whose perspectives are more valuable here than mine are.
If you want to understand better, the best way is to listen more to the specific experiences of a wide variety of non-binary people, keeping in mind that no two people's experiences are the same.
So now we're in a bathroom at Twin Oaks Community. I know that's a little weird, and I'm going to introduce you to some communards in a bit, but first I need to introduce you to some labels, and the best place to do that is, oddly enough, this bathroom. In the stall of every bathroom in this building, there's a copy of the Twin Oaks Community Fundamental Documents. And these documents, they start with a bunch of definitions, including for this word, co. Co is a gender-neutral pronoun that stands for she or he, but it can also stand for another word that the people here refer to each other as, communards. So, Twin Oaks is a commune. It's the largest and oldest member of a North American network called the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, or FEC. Now, I don't live at Twin Oaks, I live at an affiliated community called Eastbrook Farm, but I'm here doing labor exchange. So all of the FEC communities are income sharing, which means it's really easy for communards from one community to visit another and exchange their labor. Like, for example, later today I have a shift in that tofu factory behind me. Check out this tofu that Twin Oaks makes. Twin Oaks also runs a hammock making business. This room is where the hammocks are woven. Here's the lumber mill where the wood for the hammocks is cut, and here's the wood shop where the hammock frames are manufactured. This is the courtyard, and the buildings behind me are residences where the communards live. This building is called Koea. Let's see what's inside. So, Kauea is a family-centered living group. It's occupied by mostly couples and their kids, and there's a poster on one of the bedroom doors that I want to show you. So it's a comic called Back in the Olden Days, and it has this Adam and Eve thing going on, and the first panel says, "Did you know that there used to only be 2 genders?" This one says, "Gran told me, back in the olden days." And then this one replies, "How is that even possible? There were just men and women. Genderqueer wasn't even a word yet, and you had to act and dress a certain way depending on which one you were. Like, women were supposed to care about fashion and babies and falling in love, and men were supposed to care about work and politics and supporting their families. That's so weird. So everyone was supposed to be fractions of what people actually are? I guess so. I mean, how could you even choose? I don't think you got to choose. I think it depended on your genitals." And then this face is the punchline. Ha ha ha, no, I think Gran was pulling your leg. There's this feeling at Twin Oaks like everyone is coming together to build a better society, and this comic on the door is just a tiny example of that. I don't want to give the impression that the communities are like these magical genderqueer utopias, because they're not. There's transphobia here just like there is everywhere, but I do think that they allow gender to be experienced slightly differently. Let's hear from a communard named Sal.
You know, gender does operate a little bit differently here. Gender is understood in a little bit of a different way here. It's pretty visible by everything from expression to behaviors that are considered normal for genders here. It's definitely much more blurred. Much more blurred.
Could you give an example?
Like, I think clothing is probably the most visible way to see that, just like walking through here. There's no such thing as gendering in commie clothes. Everything is put together.
So let's take a look at commie clothes. It's pretty special. So this is Commie Clothes. It's a community-wide clothing library, and the insight here is that people don't actually need to own their own clothes, they just need access to clothing that they like. I'm gonna find myself a nice dress. I think this'll do. So Twin Oaks members can come up here and they can take anything they want, and when they're done with it, they can just drop it in the laundry room where it'll get cleaned and put back. Because communards share so much of their clothing, the role that clothing plays in gender performance is reduced. There's not so much of a need to declare who you are with what you wear.
Like, when I go between Twin Oaks and, like, if I go to town or something, I have to, like put on a harder gender presentation to go outside. That I can just, like throw on whatever. I don't feel as concerned about, like, let's say binding perfectly here, worrying quite so much.
Sal isn't the only communard to say something like this. Let's hear from Stefan.
I think about gender a lot less living here. Like, I don't as much feel like I need to put on a performance for people, because most people know something about everybody who lives here, and so I'm not necessarily afraid to be, like, misgendered because of what I'm, like, put on in my, like, lazy, I'm just walking down to the courtyard real quick, or whatever. In order for me to feel good about myself, I don't need to be performative. Like, when I choose to be performative, like, it's because I feel like it.
Right.
Like, I just feel fancy today. In the mainstream, it was like, I'm making conscious decisions or, like, unconscious decisions based on how I want people to treat me. And I don't really have to worry about that, like, oh, well, people will treat me different if I do gender in a certain way or not, because they know me as a person.
I think that most people in the communities would say something similar, that in the communes they don't worry so much about gender performance because people know them on a personal level. It's one of the most striking things about these communities, that gender certainly exists, but the way that it is performed just changes. Let's hear from one more communard, someone named Tyga, who lives in a community down the road named Acorn. It doesn't seem like you really try that much to perform gender at all.
No, well, I ain't got time for that shit. For real though, like, I got a life to live. Like, sometimes I get dressed up in ways I actually like, but, like, you know, I live on a farm.
Yeah.
I'm wearing work clothes because I'm gonna work in these. Like, I moved like half a ton of seed around today. You know, like, I think people do have a tendency to get, like, very focused on performance and, like, seeing validity of gender is sort of like proven through expression. That's never really made sense to me.
So part of this is that because the FEC is so tight-knit, there's less of a need for gendered performance because everybody knows each other personally.
It's not just me that's like not being performative. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people who are non-judgmental, who are like willing to listen to other people. Like I can talk to people and people aren't always going to agree with me. But I know that I can like have a real conversation with anyone here. And that's a really big deal.
But another part is that the meanings of certain gendered performances have themselves changed in this environment.
What you traditionally expect is different. Tons of people will make out with people of different genders at parties, and there's a lot more like experimentation. There are dudes who wear skirts who have no sense that they are anything other than male. That's not an indicator of like a different gender here. This thing that usually means this doesn't mean that anymore. So you're like, oh hey, asymmetrical haircut, skinny jeans person. Oh, you're straight? What?
So in the communes, the markers that delineate one gender from another can get a bit blurry, and I think a big part of the reason why has to do with the radical way that the economies of these communities are structured. So I mentioned earlier that FEC communities are income sharing, and what that means is that all of the money from all of their businesses is pooled into a common pot. And what that means for individuals is that the value of their labor isn't valued in dollars, it's valued in hours. So here is my labor sheet for this week at Twin Oaks. All Twin Oaks members are required to work 42 hours a week in this system, but what counts as labor is pretty broad. So some shifts are work, like this shift in the tofu factory that generates money for the commune, but other shifts are what would in the past have been considered women's work, like this dinner cook shift or this cleaning shift. They don't generate any money, but as far as the Twin Oaks labor system is concerned, they're just as valuable as any other kind of labor. The result is a society with no bosses and no rent and much less pressure to spend your time in ways that make money. And removing all this pressure from people can be quite transformative. Let's hear from some more communards.
Since I don't have to spend so much time worrying and thinking about taxes and my boss and my car and my apartment and my landlord and all those other external uses of my mental energy, then throughout the day I have the mental headspace to reflect on myself, I guess. I think in the external world there wasn't time to figure out myself so much, and at Twin Oaks there is.
When you don't have so many practical personal problems pressing at you, you have more space to come to understand your own individuality.
So the communes aren't explicitly genderqueer spaces. Most people here still identify as cis, and not everyone is familiar with modern trans-friendly language. But even if their support isn't always explicit, what the communes provide their members with is space and time.
When I was 5, I was headed to public school, and my mom said that I couldn't wear dresses. I asked why, she doesn't really answer. It's not because my mom's transphobic, it's just because she was scared. There was never a clean slate place for me to start. There was never a time for me to investigate who I was or how I wanted to interact with the world, free of the constraints and violence and punishment from the outside world.
I'm happy to be in a space where I can explore anything I want. The community still has my back, whatever I do. I could just wear jeans and t-shirts and grow a beard and decide I don't feel queer anymore, and the community would still be, hey, you're welcome here and we love you, and I could, months or years down the line, transition and the community would still say, you're welcome here and we love you.
By giving their members space, the communities foster an environment where gender doesn't have to be so stereotyped. You don't need to choose a label here in order to be recognized as who you are.
One of the things that was most damaging to me as a young person was this narrative that like, you're confused, you don't know who you are yet, this is a phase, you'll grow out of it.
And you're gonna pick something at one point.
Right, but like, there's this response to this, there's like, no, I'm not confused, I know what I am this. That's a position that I regret being forced into. I don't stand by that. I don't know who I am. Like, my position is confusion, and I think that's a powerful one.
I think one of the big points that I'm trying to make here is that gender is structured by environment, and the environment of the FEC doesn't really foster conditions where people feel the need to tell stories about themselves that are strongly binary.
I also would love to live in a society where we didn't have to think about gender ever, and we were just people. And you could have a gender. Everybody could have a gender. Gender doesn't have to be done away with, but that it doesn't dictate what we do or how we dress or whatever. That's just your personality.
Me personally, I'm a gender abolitionist. This shit's a bunch of garbage. I want to see it be completely gone. When you look at the sheer amount of effort put into enforcing gender, it's an active project. In order to make gender and race still a thing, these are things that require
energy,
active, dedicated work, power put in, violence on the ground. In a certain way, the project of abolishing gender, you just need to stop people from defending it. It crumbles the same way that you could build a wall, and unless you maintain it, eventually it's just going to fall down.
Yeah.
You don't actually need to destroy the wall. You could, that's faster, but if you stop people from maintaining it, it will crumble on its own.
So this channel is about biology, right? So let's go back to the studio and I'll throw in some evolutionary theory. So there's this term called relaxation of selection. Here. Relaxation of selection. And biologists use this term to describe times when natural selection gets masked and no longer plays an active role in honing some sort of adaptive trait. So let's imagine a graph for something simple, like bird beak size. The x-axis can represent the size of the beak, and the y-axis can represent the percentage of the population at that size. If there's only one type of seed available, this will produce what's called selective pressure that will keep beak size limited to a very narrow range. Then, if a bunch of seeds of different sizes suddenly become available, this will have the effect of relaxing that selective pressure, and beak size will evolve more variation. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think about how the communes affect gender in terms of relaxation of selection. Outside the communes, there's a lot of normative pressure to perform gender in certain stereotyped binary ways. If you don't, you could lose your job or your housing or even your family, but in community, none of those things will change if your gender performance does. So selective pressure is relaxed and gender expression diversifies.
In a certain way, the project of abolishing gender, you just need to stop people from defending it. It crumbles the same way that you could build a wall, and unless you maintain it, eventually it's just going to fall down.
Relaxed selection also plays a critical role in a macroevolutionary pattern called the major transitions in evolution. There are a handful of these transformational points on the tree of life, where organisms combine to form a higher order organism. For example, when bees started living together and formed hives, or when single-celled organisms combined into multicellular bodies. What happens in a major transition is that the locus of organism changes. The unit of selection stops being the bee and becomes the bee hive. And relaxed selection is one of the most important markers for a major transition. When organisms start living together more intimately, some parts of their physiology, particularly parts that have to do with reproductive function, get redundantly copied by others in the group. And as these functions become more widely duplicated, the selective pressure that was keeping those traits stereotyped in each individual is relaxed. Traits are allowed to wander and develop new variations and synergies. And these new synergies have the effect of making the group as a whole even more tightly integrated than it was before, eventually evolving into a whole new level of organism. So when I look at the communes from an evolutionary perspective, the way that gender is expressed here looks to me like relaxed selection and perhaps the beginnings of a major transition. If the unit of selection becomes the community instead of the individual, then the role that gender plays in a human life can be completely rewritten. Gender can diversify and take on new functions as the reproductive functions it originally had become redundant. Seriously? Are you still going on about this major transitions thing? Who are you? Half the videos on this channel are about major transitions. Do you have to tie it into, like, literally everything? Well, it's a really important idea, but it has almost nothing to do with the way that trans people actually experience their lives. Don't you remember what Violet said?
I think there is this problem, the problem of looking at gender as a big thing, like a societal thing or an evolutionary thing. My experience of gender is entirely personal and internal. I don't look at my gender through the lens of politics. I don't look at my gender through the lens of society. societal or biological evolution. All these things feel like completely irrelevant to my experience of gender. My experience of gender has always been internal, tangible.
And Natalie said the same thing. This is supposed to be a video about a lecture that she gave for the Evo seminar series. Remember that?
I mean, I think that this kind of like functionalist thinking about this in the terms of like, why is it suddenly adaptive for people to be trans? I think that's sort of alien to the way trans people think of themselves.
So they don't think about gender in evolutionary terms, but that doesn't mean that I can't. Well, it kind of does, actually. We're 20 minutes into the video and you're off talking about major transitions and relaxed selection, and you haven't even mentioned dysphoria, even though that's the most important factor in why people transition.
Well, I keep saying this, but dysphoria really was the primary reason.
Dysphoria is everything. I don't think there's a single other experience that is more present. It's always present and it's entirely encompassing. Like, there doesn't feel like a single part of my life that dysphoria doesn't touch. There isn't a single moment where there's relief or a break from it.
I just knew something was kind of wrong. Like, I sort of didn't like the way people saw me. I felt that there was something that that I would never put into words, but that once I was sort of started becoming more educated about trans people and, you know, talking to trans people and things, I realized, like, you know, like, that's what's going on with me.
Throughout this video, you've been talking about being trans as if it were a choice, as if the FEC were some sort of experimental environment that lets people scratch their heads and go, I wonder what it would be like if I changed genders. But isn't it kind of like that, actually? Violet did say something pretty similar.
Being here was my first exposure to gender nonconformity, and I guess, like, it wasn't until it was in my face that I, like, applied that lens to myself and recognized that I absolutely wasn't a cis dude.
She didn't say that living in community let her decide to become a woman. She said it let her recognize that she wasn't a man. That's a huge difference.
I hate the trope of, oh, I'm so proud of you. I respect your choices and decisions.
This is not a choice.
It's not a choice. It's not a decision.
I don't think I chose to be trans.
Part of why it, like, hurts and frustrates me so much when people talk about this being a choice, because I would have never made the choice to be trans. I think you would have to be out of your mind. I'm a trans person who's transitioning, and I have no understanding of people who transition without the dysphoria, because I wouldn't have done it without the dysphoria.
You couldn't imagine why anyone would transition without dysphoria.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, because some people do, right?
Yeah, like, you're considering it.
Yeah.
You're considering transitioning because of higher thought. You're not considering transitioning because it feels like life or death.
Yeah. Move over. You've got some explaining to do. Fine. All right. Let's do this. Apparently, I'm thinking about transitioning. Here we go. This video has tried to cover a lot of territory, and we've been talking about gender on a number of different scales, and I haven't done the best job at differentiating them, so let's try to clear some things up. I started the video on the social level, right here, talking about how gender is affected by the unique social circumstances of the FEC. We listened to some communards, and then I used what they said to try to make a point on the species level, right here, about the role that genderqueering practices might play in the evolution of the human species as a whole. But when I showed a draft to Violet, she took issue with the evolutionary statements that I was trying to make about gender in general, and so the rest of this video really needs to take a personal tone.
And it frustrates me when people conflate my identity with making a statement. I'm not making a statement. I didn't come out as trans to make a statement. I'm not doing this for the world.
When I was interviewing all the communards for this video, I consistently tried to interpret what they said in terms of the scientific, evolutionary themes that captivated me about major transitions and what it means to be an organism, without fully acknowledging the personal bias that went into that scientific interpretation.
This is what we postmodernists mean when we complain that science often privileges a white cishet male perspective. It's not that I hate men or male sexuality, I just hate that the male sexual perspective is so powerful that it gets to call itself science.
When I started to take Natalie's point seriously, I realized that my desire to talk about gender up here on a scientific, evolutionary level stemmed from a personal desire to tell a story about my own gender that didn't quite resemble any of the other stories that I was hearing. Because I am considering transitioning, and if I do, it won't be because of dysphoria, and it will feel like a choice. I overlooked dysphoria in the first half of the video because it's not something that I had any real physical experience with, at least not until quite recently. I've never felt alienated by my body, and I've never felt the need to perform gender in a certain way in order to be perceived how I want it to be. Well, until right now. Look at me wearing a dress and talking into a camera. If this isn't gender performance, then I don't know what is. When people describe dysphoria to me, it always seemed to be defined by a sense of urgency and deep pain of a kind that I'm not sure I've ever experienced. But the more that I listened to different dysphoric narratives, the more that I realized that it did seem to apply to me, but with a twist. If I have experienced dysphoria, it's never been in reference to my body explicitly, but more like myself in an abstract sense. It's difficult for me to describe it without using religious imagery because for me, ideas about transitioning have always been tightly coupled to ideas about transcendence. Let me show you some images. These are pictures of the divine androgyne, all from 16th century alchemical manuscripts. These pictures are all about the transformations that occur during an alchemical experiment, and they're not so much about physically becoming a woman or becoming a man, so much as they are about embodying the qualities of both to achieve a kind of wholeness. In alchemy, there's this promise that it's possible to radically transform yourself and become something more complete than you were before. And that's how I always thought about transitioning. If I did, it wouldn't be about becoming the woman I always knew I was supposed to be. It would be about transcending the boundaries of a single physical body and becoming something more universal. And that's also why I've been so grabbed by the evolutionary idea of major transitions. A beehive isn't male and it isn't female, it has qualities of both, and they function together to make a whole. And if you think of a community as a similar kind of superorganism, then the people who make it up don't have to be exclusively male or exclusively female, because the actual reality is that we're all a part of this bigger, higher order kind of self that transcends gender. But I think the most important thing to point out here is that all of this stuff that's motivating me, alchemical imagery and evolutionary biology, it's all ideas, and kind of half-baked ideas at that, if I'm being honest. These ideas do feel, to me, like good reasons to transition, but they're all in my head. They're reasons. They don't give me the felt experience in my body that something is wrong in a life or death sort of way, the way that people tend to talk about it when they talk about gender dysphoria. So, if I don't experience dysphoria, do I have any right to call myself trans or even queer? Like, why am I making this video?
Oh, look at person born with a penis who's wearing a dress saying that this is a choice because of A, B, and C. Now I understand trans people. It's like, no! There are many trans narratives. I would really like a way to differentiate between, to bring awareness to, and to like have people not just approach it through the lens of this person is doing this thing because that's what they want to do. Would you say that a diabetic gives themselves insulin shots because it's like, it's what they want to do? It's like, no, there's nothing fun about having a like debilitating problem that you need to solve.
So if I were to transition, it would be a decision because it was something that I wanted to do based on my thoughts on, well, transcendence. But the way that Violet talks about it, transitioning is more like treating an illness, and I'm not sure how related our two experiences of transness are.
Like, it is only recently that I have come to an awareness that this is actually probably like one of the biggest factors in why there's like, at least for me, like a seeming lack of understanding for transness. And it's also brought to my attention that I misunderstand transness because apparently there's lots of trans people who have completely different experiences, not just in their timeline, but in their motivations and in their feelings.
So, am I trans? I don't really know, and I'm not sure how much the question matters. Mostly, I just feel lucky that I don't have to know, and that I live in a community that allows me to be ambiguous.
Maybe like I'm a like genderless space alien, like I just got like dropped off here. Just like wondering where my next taco is coming from. I don't know who I am. Like my position is confusion, and I think that's a powerful one.
What it means to be human is evolving quickly. It's possible to live an identity today that wasn't even imaginable a few decades ago, and the identities we'll be able to live in the future are only going to get weirder.
Like, things are going to evolve to a point where I'm going to find myself at the place where the lesbian feminists are finding themselves, or like there's this thing happen that I don't understand, and all these things that I used to protect myself are now oppressive. I have to deal with that. It's going to evolve. There are going to be new identities. I think that's important to just let that happen.
I'm lucky enough to not have to deal with dysphoria, so when I think about transitioning, I can be motivated by ideas about the future of humanity. It's confusing, and I feel like a queer imposter a lot of the time, or like some shitty pseudoscientist, but it's also really exciting. But this video has gone on quite long enough, so I'll give Natalie the final word.
It's kind of a baby step in the direction of like very sophisticated biological self-determination. Who knows what the future is going to hold for humans, but like it's conceivable that this is kind of an early experiment in people doing all kinds of things to change their biology. Whether we want to take this in like a kind of transhumanist way, I don't know. That could be a possibility in the future, and I think in some ways trans people are kind of like pioneering a version of that. That to me seems like a potentially radical step in a new direction for what's possible in a human life.
Thanks for watching this rather unusual episode of the EVOS seminar series. This channel is a virtual classroom of sorts. We host live lectures on evolutionary topics, and then we make videos about their ideas. There's a link in the description to Natalie's full talk on radical trans biology. You should totally check it out. It's super interesting. And I've also put some links to some other videos about the Federation of Egalitarian Communities if you want to learn more about the Communities movement. I really appreciate that you are here to the end, and I will see you next time. When I interviewed Natalie for this film in 2017, I asked her a question about detransition that I wish I hadn't. As soon as I asked it, I saw this look on her face, and I knew that I had said something wrong, or that I'd stepped on something that I didn't quite understand. I hadn't yet listened to all the conflicting narratives about it, all the arguments about what dysphoria is or isn't. I didn't yet understand the ways that it could motivate people to change their bodies, but now I do, vividly. And actually, I'm pretty sure that I knew what dysphoria felt like long before I made this film. I just didn't know how to talk about it yet. And I don't think that my transition was a choice anymore. I think it was a response to a sensation that I'd felt in my body for my entire life. And this video was me struggling to find words for a physical feeling. And frankly, I still don't have words for it. The only way I can talk about it is with metaphor. Transition altered the ways that I think. It changed the ideas that feel important to me and the ways that I want to express them. I would never make a film like this today. And in fact, I want nothing more than to be done with this phase of my life and the reasons that keep me still here talking about it 5 years later. That's basically why I made this postscript. I used to think about science and gender and culture and organism in some peculiar ways, and so I made a film about it, and then I changed. And the next time you see me here, I'll have changed even more. I'll see you then.